Welcome to Tibalt's Apprentice. It's been far too long and far too much COVID. That's what's been going on. So anyhow, we are back, and as you can see by the surroundings, we are at wonderful Comic Bug / Game Hub here in Manhattan Beach. And we're here to talk about Rakdos. A couple of things we're actually going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about Prosper, the Tome-Bound, and we're going to talk about pre-constructed decks. And so let's just get right into it. Without giving a ton of explanation, I'm going to talk about the cards that I pulled out. And Hex. Pulled out because destroying 6 target creatures, that 6 is a hard number. Hard number to make sure that you get. Somebody sacks something in the meantime, that means that you lose out on that spell. Don't ask me how to pronounce this. Anyhow, with 4 black mana and 3 colorless, you're looking at something that is way too hard to cast in the early game. And I understand that it has a suspension cost of 1 black mana and 1 colorless. But again, you've got to make sure that your targets are there at this point. A lot of these are just pulled because they're too darn expensive. Things like Fevered Suspicion, looking at this, also the Eye Tyrant, Ogre Slumlord, Dream Pillager, all cards that just cost too much. We want this deck to be a little bit faster, and we're concentrating on winning. So with that in mind, we're also cutting some of the cheaper spells too, and putting in things that give us more value. Every turn we want to move closer towards victory, especially with this commander. You're earning those treasure tokens as you're casting your spells, so you want to use that incremental advantage to just choke the other person out, basically. So we're getting rid of cards like Share the Spoils, Shiny Impetus, Ebony Fly, Orzhow's Relic, Fiend Lash, and Chaos Wand. All of those cards, while useful in various situations, feel a little bit too specific. Cards that we would put in instead. So, something like this sweet artwork here, which is cut to ribbons. The cut we're not going to use so much, but the ribbons, the late game mana sink for all those treasure cards that you're making, is what we're going for there. Outpost Siege, the fact that it's an enchantment makes it hard to remove, and of course at that time you're going to either choose Khans or Dragons, and for the most part you're going to choose Khans because you want that top card exiled. One thing about this deck, while it's not for beginners, I guess, I would be cautious using this as a beginning deck. Takes a little bit of knowledge of the stack, takes a little bit of knowledge to make sure that you are indeed keeping your cards separate and remembering all of your triggers. Speaking of triggers, the Longbow is another good card. You have a Death Touch commander, so putting something on it, allowing it to do even a single point of damage to any creature, kills that creature immediately. Valakut Exploration, another landfall trigger, another enchantment, good for the deck. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it's exiled. This is what I'm referring to about keeping track of your triggers and keeping track of which cards are exiled under what effect. There's going to be a lot to keep track of. No shame in keeping a piece of paper handy, maybe keeping a few extra dice. Clarifying right at the beginning of the game where you're going to be putting things can be helpful. A simple card like Poison the Cup, useful to destroy a target creature if it was foretold. I like having a little bit more direct removal in here. I'll save that card for a little bit later. Volcanic Torment, another one with Cascade. Volcanic Torment deals X damage to each creature or planeswalker your opponent controls, where X is the number of spells you've cast this turn. Again, we're cashing in our single spells that we cast for value, getting those treasure tokens. Once those treasure tokens are built up, gives us a chance to go off. We're looking for that big turn that we can finish folks with. Working out synergies within the deck, though, a liquid metal torque is also a source of mana, since we did pull a couple of mana rocks out. But the fact that a non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to other types can be combined with other cards to get extra value. Things like Discipline of the Disciple of the Vault. Whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose a life. Well, you're definitely going to be cashing in on those treasure tokens, doing 1 point of damage to target opponent, but being able to turn other cards that aren't necessarily an artifact suddenly becomes a little bit more value to cash in on. One of the best additions to this, I think, is the Academy Manufacturer. If you would create a clue, a food, or a treasure token, create one more of each. Well, we hope to get this on the battlefield early. Again, building value, value, value. Dream Devourer. Each non-land card in your hand has Foretell. Foretell is equal to the mana cost reduced by 2. It's a way of putting things into exile. Again, we're cashing in on the exile where this initial deck doesn't. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. One of the things about pre-constructed decks, well, there's a few things that we know about them every time, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Wild Mage Sorcerer is going in here. The first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade, so you can cash in on more value. The Master of the Review, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When he dies, deal damage equal to its power to any target. Again, you see how we're starting to work these synergies in together. A Reckless Fireweaver, instead of the other Reckless card that was in here before. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it does a point of damage. So now we're actually starting to do some damage with our synergies. One of the best that we can do here, though, is going to be Bolas Citadel. Looking at the top card of your library at any time, you may play the top card of your library. If it's a spell you cast that way, you pay life equal to the converted mana cost. You can then sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and each opponent loses 10 life. Well, at this point, we should have plenty of treasure tokens, and we should be able to whack everybody for a good 10 points of life. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, and that's the idea of pre-constructed decks. I understand in some cases, and maybe early on when you're starting to play the game, you're not going to want to take apart your deck. You bought the deck, they gave you a list of 100 cards, but here's a few things to keep in mind. That deck is the most powerful 5 minutes before you open it. Because as soon as you open it, it's set in stone. And I would argue that your chances of winning with that deck diminish even further because your deck list is published and everybody knows what's already in there. Even if I don't know every single card that's in your deck, I know that you're playing a pre-constructed deck. Therefore, your mana base is going to be weak. You're going to be caught with dead cards in your hand that don't really serve the function of the deck. And I know right off the bat that you're not going to have strong, firm, winning synergies in the deck. It's just the way Wizards of the Coast makes the deck. It's a sad fact that they want to sell us more cards. And it's actually a chance to grow your deck. So if you're not going to change your deck, it's the best idea to buy 2 of them, because as far as I'm concerned, you're hamstringing yourself right at the very beginning by only choosing to play the pre-constructed deck. So that's what I have to say about that. How do you feel about that? Are you excited to play pre-constructed decks? Are you timid about changing cards up? Another thing you can do is just to make sure to change out maybe 4 or 5 cards. You're always going to have that deck list that you can go back to and choose to rebuild the deck if you need it. But for the most part, remember, that deck is not optimized. You want to play and you want to win. Maybe if you just want a better playing experience, you may not guarantee win by changing those cards, but you're going to improve your chances of coming up with more wins. And even more than that, you're going to have a better chance to play the game. There's nothing worse than sitting around waiting for your turn to come and not having anything in your hand to play because it costs 7 or 8 mana. When you get to turn 5 and you have to play land, go, and you're not holding an instant, I almost said interrupt. That's how old I am. If you're not holding an instant or something else that's worth playing in your hand, you're losing out and you're wasting your time. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. That's the most important thing though too. So, having said all of that, what are your thoughts on pre-constructed decks, on changing pre-constructed decks, and more specifically, Prosper the Tome-Bound? What did I miss? Now, obviously, a little while ago, I did the Rakdos combos that you could put in there. We'll talk a little bit more about that maybe in our next video. In the meantime, thanks for watching.